everyone, sports fans in the Rec House, in the broader province of Newfoundland and Labrador, or anywhere that you happen to be listening. And your hockey fans, thank you for joining. It's Thursday, March 3rd. We are just 18 sleeps away from the NHL trade deadline. Few deals have trickled in. We'll get to talking about those in a few minutes. But mostly we're dealing in speculation. So we're here to speculate tonight and chat about what might go down. I'm joined by Jared Book, and Jared is the Deputy Managing Editor at Habs Eyes on the Prize. Thank you for joining, Jared.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you here. Looking forward to the chatter. I know, Jared, that you usually cover the Habs, Laval Rocket, which is the Montreal Canadiens farm team, for those who wouldn't be aware. And I know you cover a little bit of women's hockey, so shout out for that as well. But tonight, what I'd like us to do to get fans of all stripes kind of to give them a chance to think about what their teams might be up to, I'd like for us to work a little bit through a chat about each of the Canadian teams, working from the West Coast to the East Coast. We'll finish with the best, the East Coast, and we'll chat about each of those teams and kind of give a sense of what they might be up to, how their seasons have gone, what they might be up to, what we can expect from them with the season as we reach the trade deadline. So let's get started. Vancouver Canucks got off to a rough start, Jared.
Yeah, they've been better lately. I mean, if you look at the standings, they're now probably in a better spot than Winnipeg, which wouldn't have been something that you thought of when they made the coaching change, but they've been playing better under Bruce Boudreau, and they probably have the best goaltending in Canada. If you're looking at the Canadian teams, Thatcher Demko is probably the best starting goaltender in Canada right now, and that says more about the other teams than it might say about Vancouver right now. And I'm sure we'll get into that when we talk about some of the other teams in Canada. But they're kind of going to be on the seller side of things, but they can't sell too much because they have Quinn Hughes and they have Elias Pettersson on bridge deals, or in the case of Pettersson, and Hughes just signed a contract. They have to start thinking about contention, and they have a new front office as well. A lot of women and a lot of interesting names in that front office, which is great. But yeah, it's going to be very intriguing to see. Obviously, JT Miller is the big name to watch in Vancouver in terms of players that might be on the move.
For sure. I think you're right. They've got some young players. So, to begin a rebuild at this stage is obviously not where folks would like to see them headed. But they've also got a few veterans. Perhaps they're wondering where some guys fit. I'm always intrigued by Jim Rutherford. I used to call when he was with the Pens, I used to call him Brass Balls, because he would trade his mother if he thought that it would give him a better chance in the playoffs. What do you expect from Rutherford and company with the deadline coming on? Do you expect any big deal? What would be the biggest piece that you'd see on the move?
I think JT Miller will be that biggest piece if he is moved. There's obviously rumors around that. The Rangers are involved. The Maple Leafs are one of the teams that you hear around him. But I just think that I mean they're in a weird spot. They're probably in more of a difficult situation than Montreal, and we'll get at Montreal later. But because they have a lot of their young players are on established contracts. I mean, Bo Horvat is nearing free agency as well. I feel like they're going to have to make a decision one way or another, and you might see big changes in Vancouver just because you have a new regime there that might like certain players less than maybe the public or other teams, and that's the thing you have to gauge in the trade market is you might like a guy, but if someone's offering you a little bit more, or you value them more or less than somebody else, and that's where deals get done. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they go, because they haven't really made a big move yet, other than the coaching change, obviously.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what direction they go in. They haven't, really put their cards on the table yet. So that first move will be interesting. But something that we need to keep in mind, whether it's this trade deadline for any team, is that there are 16 teams that are using long-term injury reserve to stay under the cap right now. half the league is basically in that spot. So a lot of the bigger trades will probably have to wait for the off season, but there's definitely room to get stuff done, especially if you're a seller and you're motivated to sell. But it might be a little bit of a buyer's market because there might not be the market for those big trades that we usually see.
Yeah, some big contracts that teams are looking to offload for sure. In Vancouver, I'm keeping my eye on Brock Besser. I'm not sure why they'd want to move him, but that's the guy that I'm wondering if he might be on his way out the door. But as you said, if the team shows up and makes an offer on a guy like Miller that they can't turn down, and then all the tables are everything's on the table. Let's move to Calgary. Just a little further east. They're a new team under Sutter this season. Last season, not so exciting, and this year they're looking like a different team.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who call for teams to blow things up when things don't go well, when you're a contending team, and Calgary last year was in that spot. You could probably look at Winnipeg in that spot right now as well, where they're kind of in no man's land. So, but Calgary, they stuck with it. They stayed true to what they did. They got a new coach. They played better under Sutter. If the season was maybe a little bit longer, they might have caught Montreal for that last playoff spot. So it's going to be interesting to see how they go. They're top of the division right now. So they already made their big move, right? Getting Tyler Toffoli was their big move.
Huge.
And definitely helping them immediate success for Toffoli, and he was great in Montreal as well. So it's going to be interesting to see if they have anything else to do. They might want to maybe shore up the defense a little bit, maybe make some depth moves, but they have a lot of good forwards. I mean, Toffoli, Monahan on the third line right now. So they're a sneaky team. I always said going into last season when it was the all Canadian division and only 4 teams were going to make the playoffs, there were going to be 2 or 3 really disappointed teams that missed the playoffs. Calgary was one of them last year, and they really turned it around. They stuck to their guns, and are that's the argument for staying with your core, because there are a lot of people who are saying, oh, are they going to trade Monahan? Are they going to trade Gaudreau? And they stuck with it, and the proof is in the results so far.
I think I've said this, and I'll be bold here and say, I think Calgary is Canada's best chance to go deep in the playoffs. I think they're the best chance for the cup. I mean, they're going to be in tight against some others in the Eastern Conference, obviously, but in Western Conference. But I think they're Canada's best chance, and I'll piss off the Leafs fans a little bit before we even get to them, but that's I like their team. They're rumored. Ben Sherratt was rumored to be in that deal with Toffoli, and they couldn't make it happen. So they're obviously looking to shore up on D. I think they're going to be formidable.
Yeah, absolutely. And any team that wins the Stanley Cup is probably going to have to beat Colorado.
That's it.
So, what's the difference if you do it in round 3 or if you do it in round 4? But yeah, I think that, I said that Vancouver might have the best goaltending in Canada, but Jacob Markstrom's pretty good too. So
he's not bad.
He's, so there's a lot of things to like about the Calgary Flames, and it's a likable team. And I think that, when you talk about Canada's team, and teams that the eliminated Canadian teams cheer for, Calgary has to be right up there, and obviously Montreal has the connection to Tyler Toffoli in that regard, and a player that I think a lot of the fan base, if not all of the fan base, wants to see do well. So I think that there's definitely a likable aspect to Calgary, and yeah, they're definitely top of the division. They're definitely in the best spot for a playoff berth among the Canadian teams right now. And who knows, they might even be the only Western Conference Canadian team to make the playoffs. I guess we're going to get to
for
Edmonton.
Sure. In a little bit. Let's talk Edmonton. If the playoffs started right now, Edmonton's not in the playoffs. They wouldn't be in if they started today. 2 of the best players in the league on their team, and they can't get to the playoffs. Coaching change, management changes over the years, and still, in the same battle every year. And the thing that I find remarkable in it is Ken Holland being adamant that he's not trading his first round pick or any of his top prospects. So I'm not sure. You'd think he'd be eager to build around those guys, those two big C's. I look at Edmonton and see a lot of needs. What do you think the Oilers need most going into the deadline?
That's a tough question. I think that the two things they really need, I think goaltending, it has to be
for sure
near the top of the list. Ken Holland did an interview in The Athletic, I think a couple of days ago, and he said we're okay with our goaltending. I wouldn't be so secure with that. Yeah, I wouldn't be so sure about that. But I don't know what the thought process is for not trying to win now. And, Connor McDavid is obviously locked into a long contract. Leon Draisaitl is locked. But, I mean, they're in their primes. And to not make the playoffs would be an absolute failure. I mean, they already fired Dave Tippett. They have a new coach. So they might have that bump that we usually see with new coaches. But, I mean, if Edmonton isn't in a spot to go in and trade prospects and picks, who is? Like, I just feel like that has to be what they have to do. And I don't know how you can go into this trade deadline and not be like, yeah, you know what? If we miss the playoffs with Mikko Koskinen and Mike Smith, then it's okay. Well, but I mean, it's weird.
It's really strange, but I mean, it's not like this is a flash in the pan for Holland. Like, he's believed in these goalies for some time, and Koskinen has had a couple of good games right now, which I think demonstrates that he's a great backup. He's a really good second option. But in reality, they need a starter, or at least a 1A, 1B situation. And I don't think Mike Smith is reliable enough in terms of his health to be that. So it's always striking to me whenever he's so certain he doesn't need goalies. And maybe he's so certain because the D is so bad. maybe he knows that if he can fix that D, that the goaltending will be better. But there are D gaps there. Who do you see around the league that would be good fits for Edmonton? Both in net and on D.
Well, I mean, I don't want to make this too Montreal centric, but I think Ben Sherratt is a fit that might, they're a team that likes that kind of, old school physical defenseman, and Ben Sherratt obviously fits that bill. And I'm going to go a little bit off the board. I'm going to go with Jake Allen, and obviously he's hurt right now, but I think that it's kind of bad timing, because I think if Jake Allen was healthy right now, he would get a lot of interest around the league, and especially around Canadian teams. And if you're an astute listener, you're probably figuring where I'm going with this as we go east, with teams that need goaltending. But I think that Jake Allen, he has a good contract. He's been that kind of 1B goaltender both in Montreal and in St. Louis, and he's signed to a relatively good contract. He has another year left after this season, but I don't think Montreal is going to be too upset retaining salary for next season, even if they need to. So I do think that if he gets healthy enough, or if he's close enough to being healthy in little less than 3 weeks, that might be a place where things get done. And I mean, there are rumors before Allen got hurt that there was interest in Edmonton. So it's going to be interesting. I think that they definitely need goaltending. I think that they need defense. Yeah. I think that they even could use depth scoring as well. And I think that that's something that you need to look at, especially in the playoffs. I mean, you saw what happened last year against Winnipeg, where they just couldn't win a game, and a lot of that was goaltending to a certain extent, and a lot of that was Connor McDavid not being called, not drawing any penalties somehow. Yeah. So there are different factors there, but if Edmonton doesn't make a move, and even a significantly big move, and they miss the playoffs, I think that we can look back at this and say it was a failure.
For sure. This is the season where you move your first. You don't care about giving up Dylan Holloway. You add a big piece and go for it. That's my take on Edmonton. I don't know when they think they're going for it, if it's not now. But yeah, you talked about the Calgary Flames being a likable team. The Winnipeg Jets have to be about the most unlikable team in the NHL right now. I don't know when that happened. I mean, I used to like them. I remember the year they went deep that, I was all aboard the Winnipeg Jets. And now it's like, how did you all turn into a bunch of jerks? and maybe it's the Shifley effect. Maybe I'm feeling a little bit too strongly about that. But the Jets are also outside looking in right now. And, as you said, Edmonton has kind of overtaken them. Both again today, both would be outside the playoffs if they started today. They made, their coaching change, or their coach made a coaching change when Paul Maurice stepped down, but didn't really experience the bump that, say, Vancouver did when Boudreau took over. They probably went into this season planning to be buyers, and now, what the heck are they going to do? They're in an interesting place as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mentioned Calgary staying pat and not blowing things up, and Winnipeg is kind of in that same spot, right? They're a contending team. They have some young players. Obviously Cole Perfetti is a young player, and they have, but they have, Shifley is close to 30. They have, Kyle Connor who's getting into his second contract. They have Pierre-Luc Dubois, who is, on a big contract. And they have guys like Blake Wheeler, who are, older aging as well. So yeah, it's a weird dynamic. But I think that, the big thing for them is Connor Hellebuck has not been playing well. And I think that, I think that's a big factor, because he's usually a goaltender who can win games on his own. And, even a 4-0 lead against Montreal is not safe at this point. So it's one of those things where I think that, I don't know if a trade will help them as much as Connor Hellebuck getting into form. But I don't know if they're in a selling mode yet. But I think that this offseason is going to be a very interesting decision-making process for Kevin Cheveldayoff, because, it's a very similar situation to Calgary, right? Because Calgary had a lot of veterans. They were kind of going for it, and it didn't work out. And what will Winnipeg do? Will they stay pat also? Or will they try and shake things up a little bit? Obviously, they made a huge trade last year with Dubois and Laine. And, that one is not looking bad, because I like Pierre Dubois, but I mean, Patrick Laine is having a great season. So it's one of those things where at a certain point that there needs to be something done, and they're at the crossroads right now. And I don't think that they're necessarily going to sell off their big assets at the trade deadline, just because of the salary caps and things like that. I don't know if they can make it work. They're also probably going to try and sneak into the playoffs as well. So it's a little bit tough, but yeah, they're in a tough spot. They're probably the Canadian team that's the most volatile, I would say. Vancouver is probably leaning towards selling. Edmonton is probably leaning towards buying. But Winnipeg can go either way, and that's going to be a very interesting decision. If it's not in the next 3 weeks, the next 3 months will definitely be interesting.
For sure. So let's drift a little further east. You made it to my province, or not my home province, but my current home province, I guess. Toronto Maple Leafs. They have to be confirmed buyers, having another glorious regular season, at least till lately, when the wheels and net started falling off a little bit. They're starting to look a little wobbly. They have to do some damage in the playoffs this year, or heads could roll. This might be a season where, some futures are decided based on how they perform. They can't have another first round exit. And I look at the team and I see two glaring needs. And then I see, some other things they could use. They need stability in net. I look at Anderson in Carolina, and I confess I have to giggle a little bit with them struggling right now with Campbell and names get Mrazek, but they need a new look on D. Their last game was a little rough with their attempts to bring together a couple of puck movers, and then they could use a winger to help Tavares. I mean, my focus would be on D if I was Toronto, and perhaps another option in net, but they've got some needs. Give me your thoughts. What are you thinking for Toronto?
Yeah, goaltending is put a star next to that one, because it's funny because last year that Jack Campbell was not the reason they lost to Montreal in the playoffs. There are a lot of different factors in that, but
Yep.
their goaltending now is probably, the last few weeks has been one of the worst in the league, and it's a tough time for that to happen because they, like you said, they can't afford another exit, and if they finish in second or third in the Atlantic Division, then they're playing Tampa or Florida in the first round. And I mean, that's, that's not an easy matchup,
No.
and they, even if you finish in first, you're looking at, what, a team like Boston or Washington or something like that. So it's going to be a really tough situation for them in the first round. And even, because they're going to be playing a team that's, either right on their tails or right in front of them in the standings, most likely, if they finish in that 2-3 spot. If you assume that, Tampa or Florida is going to win the division, but Toronto can still do it as well. But yeah, I think that's a big one. Defense, Jake Muzzin's injury has really accentuated what would be already a weak spot. And I think that they have to fill that hole. So, I think that, Ben Sherrod is obviously a name that's been linked a lot to teams that need defense, and especially in the playoffs. Toronto saw what Ben Sherrod can do just a year ago. So that's obviously a name, and I'm gonna, Jake Allen again. I think that he'd be a perfect spot in Toronto again if healthy. There's, I also think they, like you said, they need forward depth. I mean, last year they went into the playoffs with Alex Galchenyuk as kind of a second line winger. They tried to fill that hole with Nick Ritchie. They tried to fill it with Andre Kashe, and there's positives and negatives to any solution they kind of put out there. But it's, there's Michael Bunting is kind of replacing Zach Hyman, so at least they have that going for them. But they haven't really backfilled those spots, so it's kind of a weird spot to be in because I do like their team, but at the same time, they've shown time and time again that there's holes there, and when you're so close to the cap like they are, it's tough to fill those holes. And I don't think that they're necessarily going to trade one of the big four forwards on their team. I don't think they're going to trade, especially not before deadline, obviously. But they're kind of stuck in what they can do. So all they can kind of do is hope that they strike gold with kind of like fringe additions, and that's not a great place to be in because, I keep wondering how many losses will it take before Sheldon Keefe's seat gets a little hotter, and I don't think they're necessarily going to make a trade change there before the playoffs. But at the same time, they lost big to Montreal. They lost big to Buffalo. Those are not playoff teams, and Montreal was in a similar situation a couple of years ago where they were losing to really bad teams, and at a certain point they missed the playoffs because of it. I don't think Toronto was in that spot, but at the same time, it's not a good sign, and there's still time for their goaltending to turn around. But yeah, it's tough.
It's tough, and you can see the bad habits sneaking back in a little bit, and they, as you said, they needed D before Jake Muzzin went down, and now we don't know what's happening. They need to help on the left side before Muzzin went down. They made their addition on the right side, but and I see fans, turning their noses up a little bit about Ben Sherrod. But there's a part of me that's going to be amused if the team that eliminates the Leafs has traded for Ben Sherrod. There's a lot of good teams that would like to add Ben Sherrod, and we know very well what his limitations are. We know where he's strong and where he isn't, but what he brings is exactly what the Leafs have been missing for years. I saw someone today say they wanted, they needed to add some grit and suggested Max Domi, which, I think Max Domi, wherever he lands, I think he could, he could perform well for a team in the playoffs. I think that he would love to play in Toronto and he'd bring a new, fresh, emotional thing to Toronto. But man, he can't play D, and they need to address that first, in my view. Anyway, it'll be interesting to see what Dubas does.
I mean, Max Domi, is a person, and we saw it in Montreal, who thrives in that spotlight, right? Like he craves that kind of big spotlight, and he had a rough bubble playoff in Montreal, and that kind of changed maybe even the trajectory of Montreal and his career even a little bit, because he was seen as kind of expendable as kind of the fourth option in Montreal. But if you go, you talk about, I mentioned Galchenyuk before, Max Domi is kind of a perfect fit in that spot, and he's kind of the opposite of Nick Foligno, who they acquired last year, because he's obviously going to be a little bit more offensively talented. But I think they need that. You put him with a guy like John Tavares who can play defense, and I think that Domi would fit in there, and he's one of those guys that he's going to be energized playing for Toronto.
He would.
He grew up in that room, right? So it's going to be. I think that'd be a very sneaky addition for them, because the expectations wouldn't be very high, but the potential rewards would be interesting. So I like that. As soon as you mentioned that, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, because I think that he can kind of fill that spot.
It could be a beauty of a fit. It's how they make all of it fit that's going to be, and I don't think they can afford to go to the playoffs without adding at least one guy on D. Coming further east, the Ottawa Senators are sellers again. They've been sellers since, I don't know, the last Chevette rolled off the assembly line. Pierre Dorion says that, announced that the rebuild was over. He might have said that a little bit too early. Some have suggested that Dorion may choose to both sell and add at this deadline, that he might be looking to bring players in that he can keep. Any thoughts about who might go and who might be an addition for Ottawa?
Yeah, I mean, I look at Ottawa and I don't even know if they have that much to sell, because, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that they're kind of growing, and I think that Pierre Dorion kind of explained that those comments when he said the rebuild is over, and it kind of makes sense once he added what he meant by that. And what he meant by that is they have the pieces in place. Now it's just a matter of them growing into a team. Exactly. So I think that, it's kind of a patient approach. I think that you might see a move, similar. I don't mean to bring everything back to trades that Montreal made, but similar to like a Sergachev for Drouin trade, where you trade like an 18, 19-year-old, but you get like a 22, 23-year-old, and just kind of move the level or the expectation up a little bit. And maybe trade a 23-year-old for a 25-year-old. Or something like that. So I think Ottawa is possible to make some hockey trades,
right?
And kind of getting things together in that sense, and maybe make a trade with another non-playoff team or things like that. Again, those trades are kind of things that happen in the off season, not necessarily at the deadline. But I think that those are the things that you can kind of look at for Ottawa, because I don't think that they're going to be like your prototypical sellers where they trade all the expiring contracts or veterans, because they might have some, but they don't really have that many. And I think that, what they have to do is just wait a little bit. Wait for, the Brady Kachucks and the Tim Stutzels and, Josh Norrises and all those guys to kind of grow together. And I think that's kind of where they are right now. So, they're still young, obviously. But I don't know if this could be necessarily a busy deadline, but you might see some hockey trades, because I think that there's an argument for that.
I wonder if they might be a fit for Vegas when they figure out what they need to do about their cap space, when they know what's happening with Stone, and if they've got to move someone out. They have a couple of veterans that I think would work well, and it would bring some maturity to Ottawa, but without bringing in a downgrade of players, like players that could play with those young guys, but also bring some veteran presence if they have the salary cap to take it on. Let's finish up in Montreal. You and I can talk about Montreal until, never mind this trade deadline, we can talk till next. But we don't want to drive every fan away that isn't a Montreal Canadiens fan. For a team that's been losing in a bad way, they've been a pretty interesting team to watch this season with, the changes they've made in management, bringing in Jeff Gordon and then him hiring Kent Hughes. And then their coach is now Marty St. Louis. Like, who would have called that in a million years? If you would ask me, I could have named every potential hockey guy on the planet if I knew this change was coming at the beginning of the year, and neither of these guys would have made the list. So interesting times. They're confirmed sellers. They've got both UFAs and some veteran contracts on the block. They've already dealt Sherratt and brought in some good pieces. Sherratt's a matter of time. Petry's name is out there. Lehkonen has attracted interest. How many Habs do you see moving by March 21st?
I think a good over under is 3. Because I think that's kind of the magic number, because I think Sherratt is definitely gone. If they don't trade Ben Sherratt, it's a failure. Even if they don't get a huge return for him, I think you have to trade Ben Sherratt. I think they have some sneaky depth guys like Matthew Perreault, Cedric Paquette, who have been in and out of lineup. But I think that those are some guys that playoff teams might be like, you know what, like Montreal added last year. They added guys like John Merrill and Eric Gustafson. I feel like those are like the kind of guys that Montreal can kind of trade. Brett Kulak is a name that's out there as well, and he's kind of I don't want to say the smart choice, but he's kind of like the underrated choice, right? Ben Sherratt has all the headlines, but you can make an argument that Brett Kulak is probably the more the better ad for a playoff bound team. So there's options there. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what Montreal does, because I don't think that we're going to see another Toffoli type trade in terms of like a guy like Jeff Petry, guys with term, Josh Anderson, even a guy like Brendan Gallagher, Paul Byron. I don't think you're going to see those kind of moves. But again, if a team comes calling, you have to answer the phone. So, but I do think that Montreal is going to be a mover. I think Arturi Lehkonen is going to be an absolute, very interesting watch. I'm very intrigued by that, because he is one of the players that that makes a good team great and a great team exceptional. And I look at like a team like Colorado. I look at a team like even Tampa. Obviously, Tampa has had a history with adding those kind of guys, Glenn Coleman, Barclay Goodrow. I think that is a guy that a lot of teams will call for, and the smart teams, right? Like the teams that like are perennial contenders, those are the teams that are going to call for Arturi Lehkonen, because those are teams that see value in him. And I've said this before, but I see him like as Lars Eller type piece, right? And he went to Washington. What happened? They won the cup.
Yeah.
And I think if Arturi Lehkonen gets traded, I would put money on whatever team acquires him to win the Stanley Cup, because he's just a player that is one of those players that just brings it up for the playoffs and could be really a perfect fit for a team that needs that little boost to go over the edge. So yeah, Arturi Lehkonen is, I think Sherratt has more trade value in terms of market value, but in terms of value to a team, I think it's Arturi Lehkonen.
For sure. And I agree. It will be one of those clever teams that knows what he's worth and knows what he will bring. You can put him anywhere in the lineup and he won't hurt you. And he is a dog with a bone in the postseason. Some fans will remember well his playoff goal from last season. That was the highlight reel that took them in. But that's going to be something to watch. I assume you mean 3 deals in addition to the Toffoli deal already.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Because I think that there's 2 that are, I think you pretty much easily get 2 trades, no matter which way you look at it. I don't know if Lehkonen's a lock to be traded, because I do think that Montreal sees value in him as well. But I think between Kulak and Sherratt and things like that, I definitely think that probably 2 is for sure, and they can even go 3 or 4 if teams show interest in some of their players.
I'm going to say 5, and I know that's a lot, but I don't mean 5 on trade deadline day necessarily, but 5 between now and then, because I think a guy like Perreault is moving, and possibly even a guy like Chris Weidman. They're not going to fetch any return, but I think you're going to see some bodies moving out, making space for some contracts. We'll see how that goes. Let's wrap up with some final thoughts. I'm going to give you 3 quick questions. It's kind of one of those games, Jared, where you got to tell me the first thing that comes in your mind. First thing on the top of your head, hair. So here we go. Who will be the biggest name moved at the trade deadline?
Biggest name, Claude Giroux. I think that's probably the biggest name. It's maybe a little bit obvious, but I think Claude Giroux is probably the biggest name that will probably move. Yeah.
Who's most likely to make a bad deal? Kind of like the Leafs trading for Foligno last year, a bad deal.
Yeah. I'm gonna go with. I know we just said that they need to do something, so I'm gonna say Edmonton. I just feel like a team is gonna get desperate, and I don't know if they're gonna evaluate things properly. So, but again, they might not trade anybody. So I already regret my answer. I know you said the first thing that came to my top of my head, but yeah, I guess I'll stick with Edmonton since that's my answer. But I'm feeling bad about that now.
Who will win the trade deadline? Which team is going to pull off the trade that?
I feel like Tampa is always a contender for that. But I'll just go with what I said before and say whatever team acquires Artturi Lehkonen. I think whatever team acquires Artturi Lehkonen will win the trade deadline.
Makes sense. We're ready for the playoffs, or for the trade deadline rather. Playoffs come after that. The trade deadline, March 21st, 3 p.m. Eastern. That's 4:30 Newfoundland time, and that's when you'll be coming home from work. When you'll be, the final deals will be getting approved by the NHL head offices, and you'll be walking in the door to your dinner and to find out what teams did at what they managed to drive in at the end. It's going to be a good day. I'll be back on that day with some fan reaction as we move through the day. But for now, we've got you ready, got you thinking about what's going to go down, got you ready to watch your team and see what's coming up. Want to say thank you to Jared Book for joining. Lots of fun having you. Great to hear your thoughts and your insight, and we'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Have a good one.